The November rain poured down on Brooklyn like endless silver curtains, transforming the streets into rivers reflecting neon lights and car headlights. Lily Chen pushed through the glass door of Sal's diner, shaking water droplets from her long black hair, while the familiar warmth of coffee and grilled cheese embraced her like a worn but comforting blanket. Her sneakers squeaked against the black and white checkered floor as she hurried toward the back, already 15 minutes late for her double shift, the third job of her endless day. Rosa called out from behind the counter with her thick Puerto Rican accent, more concern than reproach in her voice, telling her she was late again. Lily responded breathlessly while tying her apron around her waist with the efficiency of someone who had done this thousands of times, explaining that the subway was delayed and she had to stop by the hospital to sign consent forms for her mother's new chemotherapy round, then rush home to give her brother his medication because the temporary caregiver had called in sick. When Rosa asked about May, Lily forced a smile, though the weight on her shoulders seemed to press down harder than ever. The doctors said her mother was responding to treatment, but the medical bills were something she did not want to mention, the numbers that kept her awake night after night. The debt had piled up to over $350,000 for her mother's cancer treatment alone. And then there was Danny, her 19-year-old brother, paralyzed from the waist down after a car accident 2 years ago, needing a $200,000 spinal surgery for any chance of walking again. Over $500,000 in total. A mountain she was climbing one triple shift at a time, surviving on 3 hours of sleep and dreams she had long abandoned. Rosa squeezed her hand and said that God provides, that she was a good daughter and her father would be proud. The mention of her father sent a familiar ache through Lily's chest. Detective Thomas Chen had been killed 12 years ago when she was just 16, shot during a case that was never solved, rumors whispering it was connected to the Mafia. He had always taught Lily that doing the right thing was not always easy, but it was always worth it. She tried to live by those words, even when doing the right thing meant working 3 jobs and watching her youth slip away like sand through her fingers. Rosa gently pulled Lily back to reality, reminding her that Table 6 needed water and Booth 12 had just been seated. Lily grabbed the water pitcher and began her rounds through the familiar landscape of red vinyl booths and chrome-edged tables. The evening crowd was building steadily, with truck drivers grabbing a quick meal, nurses from the hospital still in their scrubs, elderly couples who had been coming here for 50 years, and occasionally, though Lily tried not to think about it too much, people from the other side of the law. Brooklyn had its shadows, its whispered stories, its unspoken rules. Lily had learned early to keep her head down and never ask questions about the men in expensive suits who sometimes occupied the corner booth. A small voice pulled her attention to booth 7, where 2 6-year-old children, a boy and a girl, were practically bouncing in their seats. Gia and Nico, the twins. Lily's face lit up with genuine warmth as she approached their table. Gia, with her dark curls held back by a purple headband, grinned widely, saying, "Daddy said they could have pancakes for dinner and asked for chocolate chip ones, please." Nico declared he wanted blueberry with a serious expression comically at odds with his small face, looking like a miniature businessman in his little polo shirt. Tonight, their father sat across from them, and Lily felt that familiar mix of fascination and unease. Dominic Valentino was impossible not to notice even when he was trying to blend in. He wore a simple black sweater and jeans, no flashy jewelry, but something about him commanded attention. Maybe it was the way he held himself with the perfect posture of someone accustomed to absolute power. Maybe it was the sharp intelligence in his steel gray eyes, cold as winter, and constantly aware of everything around him. Or maybe it was simply the reputation that preceded him, the whispered stories that floated through Brooklyn's underground. Everyone knew who Dominic Valentino was, even if they pretended not to, the most powerful and ruthless mafia boss Brooklyn had seen in decades. But Lily had also seen him with his children, and that version of Dominic Valentino was someone entirely different, gentle, patient, present in a way that spoke of genuine love. She watched as Gia tried to balance a spoon on her nose, Nico immediately copying her, both children dissolving into giggles when the spoons clattered to the table. For just a moment, Dominic's cold expression softened into something approaching peace, a real smile transforming his entire face. Lily delivered their order and felt his steel gray eyes follow her briefly before returning to his children. Not threatening, just that careful awareness he directed at everything around him. The diner was filling up now, windows fogged with condensation, creating a cocoon-like atmosphere that made the harsh world outside seem distant. And then the first gunshot shattered the front window, sending glass exploding inward like deadly rain. If you want to know what happens next, like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. because the bullet that was about to change everything was not aimed at the Mafia boss, but at his children, and only one person stood between them and death. Time seemed to shatter into strange, disconnected fragments, as the sound of breaking glass was still raining down onto the diner floor. Lily stood frozen for a split second, the water pitcher slipping from her hand and exploding into pieces. Yet she did not hear it, her ears ringing as if someone had pressed a mute button on the entire world. Then everything came rushing back at once with 10 times the force. Screams tore through the air from every corner of the diner. Tables and chairs crashed as customers panicked and threw themselves to the floor in search of cover. And somewhere in the chaos, children were shrieking in terror. Rosa screamed something in Spanish from behind the counter before collapsing face down on the floor, both hands clamped over her head. An elderly couple in booth 11 trembled as they huddled beneath their table, the husband trying to shield his wife with his thin, fragile body. A nurse, still wearing her hospital scrubs, was crawling toward the back door, her face drained of all color, pale as paper. The sharp, bitter smell of gunpowder began to spread through the air, mixing with the scent of coffee and grilled cheese into a nauseating stench that made Lily's stomach churn. She looked toward the shattered glass doors and saw them. 2 men dressed in black stepped through what was now only a jagged frame of broken glass, guns steady in their hands with the chilling calm of men who had done this many times before. They were not rushing, not panicking, their movements deliberate, their eyes sweeping across the diner as if searching for something very specific. Lily followed the direction of their gaze, and her heart seemed to stop when she realized they were not looking at Dominic Valentino. They were staring straight at booth 7, at Gia and Nico clinging to each other and screaming. 2 6-year-old children who could not understand why their happy pancake dinner had suddenly turned into a nightmare. They wanted to kill the children to destroy the father. The realization pierced Lily's mind with brutal clarity. Dominic reacted in the very first second with the instinct of a man who had survived countless battles. He flipped the table in front of him to use as a shield, the movement so fast Lily barely registered it, and a gun appeared in his hand from somewhere beneath his black sweater. But his position was wrong. The table had fallen forward, and he was on one side while both children were on the other, unable to protect them at the same time. Victor, the stern man who always stayed close to Dominic, had been near the entrance when the attackers burst in, and was now struggling with a third man Lily had not seen at first. The two locked together amid the broken glass, unable to come to help. Gia was crying out for her father, her voice high and shrill with terror, and Nico was trying to pull his sister down beneath the booth, but his hands were shaking too badly to do anything. The 2 assassins kept advancing, gun barrels raised, fingers already on the triggers, and Lily knew that in just a few seconds, the 2 children she had served chocolate chip and blueberry pancakes to for the past 6 months would be killed right in front of her eyes. Lily did not think. There was no time to think, no time to weigh choices, no time to be afraid. 12 years earlier, her father had taught her that doing the right thing was not always easy, but it was always worth it. And in this moment her body obeyed that lesson before her mind could intervene. Her feet left the floor with a speed she never knew she possessed, hurling her toward booth 7 like an arrow released from a bow. She saw nothing except the 2 crying children, heard nothing except Gia calling for her father and Nico's broken sobs, the world narrowing to a single purpose, reaching them before the bullets did. She slammed into booth 7 at the exact instant the second gunshot rang out, her arms wrapped around Gia and Nico, dragging both children down onto the icy floor, using her own body as a shield over the 2 small forms, shaking like leaves in a storm. She pressed them down, covered them completely, turning herself into a wall of flesh between them and the men who wanted them dead. The first bullet tore through her left shoulder with a pain like a red-hot iron driven straight through bone and muscle. Lily clenched her teeth and swallowed the scream burning in her throat, her body jerking from the impact. But she did not let go. She did not let go, her fingers locked around the children as if her life depended on it, even though it was theirs that truly did. Blood began to pour from the wound, hot and slick, soaking through her white apron and staining it a deep, brutal red. The second bullet grazed her side, ripping through skin like a searing blade, and this time a low moan escaped her lips, but still she did not release them. Gia was screaming into her chest, hot tears soaking through Lily's shirt, the child crying, "Miss Lily, Miss Lily," in a voice thick with terror and desperation. Nico was quieter, but his small hand was clenched around hers with the astonishing strength of a 6-year-old who was terrified of dying, tiny fingers gripping her as if she were the only lifeline left in a raging sea. Inside Lily's mind, through the tearing pain and the chaos crashing around her, she heard her father's voice echoing from a distant memory, warm and proud as it had been when he was alive, telling her she had done well, telling her he was proud of her. The edges of the world began to blur, colors fading like an old photograph left too long in the sun. She could feel her strength leaving her body with every drop of blood that spilled, yet she kept her arms tight around Gia and Nico, kept shielding them with a body that was growing weaker by the second. Somewhere above her, gunshots continued to thunder. People screamed, more glass shattered, but it all sounded distant, as if it belonged to another world. The only thing Lily knew for certain was that the two children in her arms were still breathing, their hearts hammering against her chest, and as long as she could hold them like this, they were still safe. She closed her eyes and prayed for the first time in 12 years, praying that she would be strong enough to be the shield until the storm finally passed. Dominic saw the waitress hurl herself into the line of fire, and something inside him froze solid. In 37 years of life, 14 years as the head of Brooklyn's underground empire, he had witnessed countless acts of madness, countless reckless choices, endless betrayals and loyalties, but never, not once, had he seen a complete stranger willing to die for his children. The girl named Lily, whom he knew only as the one who poured coffee and carried pancakes to Gia and Nico, was lying over his children now, blood streaming from her shoulder and her side, her small body trembling yet still locked around them like a mother wolf shielding her cubs. The stillness lasted no more than a single heartbeat before the predator's instinct surged back with a fury he had never known. 2 shots rang out from Dominic's hand with the lethal precision of a man trained to kill since his teenage years. The first bullet punched through the forehead of the closer assassin, dropping him before his finger could squeeze the trigger again, his body collapsing onto the shattered glass with a dull, final sound. The second bullet struck the other man square in the chest as he was turning his gun toward Dominic, sending him stumbling back 2 steps before his knees buckled and his weapon slipped from his grasp, clattering across the blood-slick floor. At the same moment, Victor finally overpowered the third attacker near the entrance, a brutal blow to the temple, knocking him unconscious, before Victor finished the threat with the butt of his gun. Silence fell over the diner as abruptly as if someone had flipped a switch, leaving only Gia's broken sobs, the ragged breathing of the survivors, and the soft, terrible sound of blood dripping onto the black and white tiled floor. Dominic crossed the diner in 3 long strides, shoving tables and chairs aside as if they weighed nothing, and dropped to his knees beside the bodies on the floor. He gently pried Lily's hands away from Gia and Nico, startled by the strength still locked in fingers that were already growing cold, as though even in unconsciousness she was still trying to protect them. Gia threw herself into his arms, crying "Daddy" in a hoarse voice shredded by fear, and Nico clung to his hand, his face pale but tearless now, watching Lily with eyes far older than his years. Dominic pulled both children close, checked them quickly for injuries, and when he saw that not a single drop of blood marked them, he turned back to the woman who had done the impossible. Lily lay there with her long dark hair spread across the icy floor, her face so pale it was almost translucent, her white apron soaked red from shoulder to hip. Dominic lifted her, cradling her head in his lap, and for the first time in many years his hands were shaking, not from fear for himself, because Dominic Valentino had forgotten how to fear long ago, but from something else he could not name. For the first time in his life, the most powerful Mafia boss in Brooklyn did not know what to do with the feeling rising in his chest. A waitress who owed him nothing, who barely knew him, who knew him only through whispered stories meant to frighten, had taken bullets meant for his children. Lily's eyelids fluttered, and she opened her eyes just a sliver, enough to see him, her lips moving until he leaned down close enough to hear the faint, fragile question asking whether they were all right. His voice trembled as he answered that she had saved them, that he would never forget this, that he swore it. And Lily gave a small, tired smile before her eyes closed again and she slipped into darkness, the wail of approaching ambulance sirens rising through the street outside. The first thing Lily became aware of was the scent of flowers, not the sharp, chemical sting of disinfectant from the public hospitals she knew all too well after countless visits accompanying her mother to treatment, but the fragrance of fresh blooms, sweet and clean, as if someone had carried an entire garden into the room. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking several times to adjust to the soft light, and what she saw made her think she was still dreaming. The room was at least 5 times larger than a standard hospital room, with walls painted a warm cream color, wide windows opening onto the Manhattan skyline, curtains of smooth silk fabric, and flowers everywhere. A vase of pure white lilies sat on the table beside her bed. Deep red roses lined the windowsill, and in the corner stood a basket of bright yellow sunflowers like small captured suns. She tried to sit up, and the pain flaring from her left shoulder instantly reminded her that what had happened was no dream. Memory crashed over her like a tidal wave. Gunshots, shattering glass, Gia and Nico screaming, hot blood pouring from her shoulder, and Dominic Valentino's steel-gray eyes fixed on her with something she could not decipher. Panic surged through her as she looked around, her heart pounding wildly while 1,000 questions crowded her mind at once. Where she was, who was paying for this luxurious room, how her mother was, whether anyone was taking care of Danny, how long she had been unconscious, her job, her shift, this month's rent. She reached for the intravenous line, trying to pull it out. She had to go home, had to work, had to earn money. She could not lie here in a room she clearly could never afford even if she worked her entire life. A warm but firm hand closed around her wrist, stopping her, and a low voice spoke from the corner of the room, making her startle. Dominic Valentino rose from an armchair she had not realized was occupied, looking as though he had been there for a long time. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by a black shirt without a tie, his hair slightly disheveled as if he had run his hands through it again and again, faint shadows lying beneath his steel-gray eyes. He came to her bedside and told her, in a steady voice that allowed no argument, that she had been asleep for 2 days. The bullet had been removed, the doctors said she was recovering well, and there would be no permanent damage. Lily opened her mouth to say something about money, about how she could not stay here, but Dominic lifted a hand to stop her and continued. Her mother, May, had been transferred from the public hospital to the best cancer treatment center in the city, with a private nurse on duty 24 hours a day, under the care of top specialists whose appointments could not normally be bought with money. Her younger brother, Danny, had a professional caregiver and was being evaluated by a team of leading neurologists for spinal surgery. Lily shook her head, feeling as though she were drowning in a world that did not follow any rules she understood, and in a voice hoarse from disuse she asked why he was doing all of this. Dominic looked at her in silence for a long moment, his steel-gray eyes no longer cold as she remembered them from the diner, but holding something deeper, something like pain and gratitude and another emotion she did not dare name. He pulled a chair closer and sat beside her bed, telling her that 2 days earlier she had taken 2 bullets meant for his children, that she owed him nothing, did not know him, perhaps even feared him like everyone else in Brooklyn. Yet she had thrown herself into the line of fire for 2 children she had only ever served pancakes to. Every cent of her family's medical debt, more than $550,000, had been paid in full, and he would not accept any refusal, because this was not generosity, it was a debt he would never be able to repay even if he gave up his entire fortune. Lily shook her head so hard that pain shot from her left shoulder down her arm, a brutal reminder of everything that had happened, and she told him in a trembling yet resolute voice that she could not accept this, that it was too much, that she had only done what anyone would have done and she did not deserve any of it. She knew what it meant to accept a debt from a man like Dominic Valentino. She had grown up in Brooklyn long enough to understand that there were no free lunches in the world of men who wore expensive suits and sat in corner booths. Her father had died because of entanglements with men like him, and now she was lying in a hospital bed paid for by the very same kind of man, guilt and gratitude and fear twisting together inside her into a knot she could not untangle. Dominic did not grow angry at her refusal the way she had expected. Instead, he sat in silence for a long moment, watching her with steel-gray eyes that no longer held the cold, ruthless edge she had known only through whispered stories, and he told her in a low, steady voice that this was not an offer she could refuse, not because he was a man accustomed to forcing others, even though that was true, but because she had saved his children with her own blood, and he was repaying a debt, that this was how he lived, how he had been taught to survive in the underworld since childhood. Then he told her about Elena, his wife, the only woman who had ever seen the real man behind the mask of the Mafia boss, who had died 3 years earlier after 2 years fighting a vicious cancer, and on her hospital bed the last thing she had asked of him was to protect Gia and Nico at all costs, to keep them safe in a world full of enemies who wanted to destroy him through the people he loved most, and he had failed. His voice dropped when he said it, almost to a whisper, and Lily saw in his steel-gray eyes the raw pain of a father who had nearly lost everything, because that night in the diner, when the assassins burst in, and he was not in the right position to shield his children, when he saw gun barrels aimed at Gia and Nico and knew he was too far away, he had believed his promise to Elena was about to turn to dust. Then she had appeared, a waitress he had never spoken more than a few sentences to, throwing herself into the line of fire and doing what he could not, keeping the promise for him to the woman he had lost, a debt that could not be measured in money. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes before she could stop them. Not from the pain of her wounds, but from something deeper. From the way he spoke of his wife, of his children, of a promise he had been trying to keep for 3 years. And she saw him then not as the ruthless Mafia boss Brooklyn whispered about in fear, but as a widower trying to raise 2 children in a world determined to destroy them. A father who had nearly lost everything and was looking at her with gratitude so real it almost seemed to have weight. For the first time, she saw the man behind the terrifying reputation. And that man was not a monster. He added that her mother was being treated by the best oncologist on the East Coast, that her brother would undergo surgery by one of the world's leading neurologists, that she no longer needed to work 70 hours a week and sleep 3 hours a night, and that if after all of this she still chose to refuse, he would respect her decision, but he truly hoped she would not. A few days after her conversation with Dominic, when Lily was strong enough to sit up and the doctors allowed visitors, the door to her hospital room burst open and 2 small bodies rushed in like twin whirlwinds of color. Gia charging ahead with her black curly hair tied into 2 little braids and her favorite purple dress. Nico following a step behind with his usual serious expression, though his eyes lit up the moment he saw her, and Gia did not slow down. She climbed straight onto the bed, wrapped her small arms around Lily with astonishing strength, and began to cry, her hot tears soaking through Lily's hospital gown as she sobbed, "Thank you, Miss Lily. Thank you, Miss Lily, for saving us. Thank you, Miss Lily, for not letting the bad people hurt us. I was so scared. I thought Miss Lily was going to die." And Lily held her close, forgetting the pain in her shoulder, forgetting the wound in her side, feeling only the warmth of a child seeking safety in her arms. Nico stood at the foot of the bed, quieter than his sister as always, but his eyes held something deeper than words, and he stepped closer, holding something pressed to his chest, and when he placed it on the bed beside Lily, her heart caught, because it was a drawing made with colored pencils on a sheet of standard A4 paper, the lines clumsy yet filled with the earnest care of a 6-year-old child, showing an angel with long black hair and large white wings spread wide, holding 2 smaller children in her arms. And above it, Nico had written in uneven red letters the words, "Angel Lily." And he spoke softly, shy as if afraid she might not like it, saying, "Daddy said you are our guardian angel, so I drew you. I did not draw very well, but I will draw better when I am bigger." Tears streamed down Lily's face before she realized she was crying, and she reached out and pulled Nico into her embrace along with Gia, holding both children with her uninjured arm, and for the first time in a very long while, she felt that she had done something truly important. Not earning enough money to pay bills, not working enough shifts to buy medicine for her mother, not the small victories she had used to comfort herself for 12 years, but something bigger, something that mattered, something her father would have been proud of, because she had saved 2 lives, 2 innocent children, who did not deserve to be dragged into the violence and hatred of the adult world, and they were here, alive, healthy, holding her as if she were the most important person in the world. Gia lifted her head and looked at Lily with dark eyes still wet with tears, and asked if Miss Lily hurt, saying she was sorry for making Miss Lily get hurt, and Lily smiled through her tears and told her it was not your fault, never your fault. She would do it 1,000,000 times again if she had to. Dominic stood in the doorway, silently watching the scene with steel-gray eyes. Lily could not read, but she could see that something in his posture had changed, the cold wall he kept between himself and the world, showing fine cracks, and through them she glimpsed a man moved by the sight of his children, finding peace in the arms of a stranger. And Nico turned to his father and said in a voice serious beyond his years that, "Daddy, I want Miss Lily to stay with us. I do not want Miss Lily to go," and Gia immediately agreed, bouncing on the bed despite careful reminders about Lily's injuries, declaring that yes, Miss Lily has to stay with us. Miss Lily is our angel, and angels have to stay close to protect us. And Lily looked at the children, then at Dominic, and saw him give a small nod with a faint smile. The first smile she had ever seen him give to someone who was not his child. 1 week after Lily was strong enough to be discharged, Dominic announced in a voice that allowed no argument that she would be staying in his penthouse until the threat had been completely eliminated, because the Castellano family, the ones who had ordered the attack at the diner, were still at large and could strike again at any time, especially against the person who had ruined their plan. And Lily wanted to protest, wanted to say she could take care of herself, but she knew it was not true. Her run-down studio apartment in a Brooklyn slum had no security, no alarm system. Even the door lock had been broken for 3 months, and she had not had the money to fix it. She had nowhere safe to go, and deep down she knew that if men like the Castellanos wanted to find her, they would do so within hours. The sleek black limousine carried Lily to a Manhattan high-rise she had only ever seen in Hollywood films about the rich and famous, a private elevator taking them straight up to the penthouse, and when the doors opened, she felt as though she had stepped into an entirely different world. The vast space framed by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a glittering Manhattan skyline, autumn sunlight flooding in and illuminating a living area designed in elegant neutral tones, polished oak floors, soft cream leather sofas, abstract art on the walls that Lily suspected could buy the entire building she used to live in, and a massive crystal chandelier suspended over the living room, casting a gentle glow like thousands of captured stars, and she stood there in her hospital clothes, still faintly smelling of disinfectant, feeling utterly out of place, like an ink stain on pristine white paper. Gia and Nico did not give her much time to feel lost, because the moment she stepped inside, the children ran toward her from somewhere unseen, each grabbing one of her hands and dragging her through the penthouse like the most enthusiastic tour guides imaginable. Gia chattering proudly about every room. "This is our playroom. This is the kitchen where Chef Marco makes my favorite food. This is the balcony where Daddy stands and looks at the city every night. And this is Miss Lily's room right next to ours, so Miss Lily can read to us every night." While Nico was quieter but did not let go of her hand, leading her with the seriousness of someone carrying out the most important mission of his life. The bedroom prepared for her was 5 times larger than her old studio apartment, with a king-size bed dressed in crisp white linens, a walk-in closet, and a private bathroom with a jacuzzi tub she had never dared to dream of. Dominic appeared after the children had finished their tour, leaning against her doorway with his familiar, unreadable expression and telling her he had a proposal, that Gia and Nico needed someone to care for them, a good woman in their lives since Elena had passed away, and he wanted Lily to take on that role, not as a maid, not as a nanny, but as a tutor and companion, generously paid with all living expenses covered, someone who would teach them, play with them, read to them, and most importantly give them the affection of a woman they had been missing for 3 years. Lily looked down at Gia, clutching her hand with eyes full of hope, looked at Nico trying to maintain his composure, while excitement shone unmistakably through, and she knew her answer before she had time to think, and when she nodded, the radiant smiles on the children's faces were a reward greater than any sum of money Dominic could have offered. The weeks that followed passed like a dream Lily scarcely dared to believe was real. Each morning she woke in a room flooded with sunlight filtering through sheer silk curtains, and it took her a few moments to remember that she was no longer in the damp studio apartment filled with the groan of rusted pipes and the sound of neighbors shouting through thin walls, because instead she heard Gia's soft giggles echoing down the hallway and the quick patter of Nico's small footsteps running back and forth, as if he could not wait one more second for her to wake up, and breakfast became a sacred ritual for the 3 of them, not in the formal dining room with its long table set for 12, but at the small kitchen table by the window overlooking Central Park, where Lily cooked pancakes for the children, chocolate chip for Gia, and blueberry for Nico, exactly the way they used to order them at Sal's diner, and their delighted cheers each time she set the plates down made her feel richer than any billionaire. Mornings after breakfast were for lessons, and Lily surprised herself by discovering that she was truly good at it, teaching Gia to read by turning every book into a small play with different voices for each character, making the little girl laugh until she begged for one more chapter, and then another, until they lost track of time. Teaching Nico math by using colorful candies as counting tools, and the serious boy suddenly came alive whenever he solved a difficult problem, his eyes shining with a pride he usually kept hidden. And Lily realized that Nico was not cold as he seemed, only someone who needed time to open his heart, and once he trusted someone, he gave them the purest love only a child could offer. In the afternoons, under the discreet protection of a security team whose presence Lily barely noticed, she took the children to the park, where Gia ran across the grass like a small, vibrant butterfly, shouting for Lily to look at what she could do each time she tried something new, from swinging higher to climbing the slide without help, while Nico preferred to sit on a bench and draw, his sketchbook and colored pencils never leaving his hands as he captured everything he saw with the astonishing focus of a miniature artist. And one afternoon he handed Lily a drawing of 3 people sitting on a park bench, a woman with long black hair in the middle and 2 children on either side, with the uneven handwritten word family beneath it. And Lily had to turn away so the children would not see her cry. Evenings were Lily's favorite time of all. After dinner and baths, she sat in the middle of the large bed in the children's room with Gia curled against her left side and Nico against her right, reading fairy tales until their breathing slowed and their eyes drifted shut. Gia loving stories of princesses and castles, while Nico preferred knights and dragons. So Lily chose books that held both and turned her voice into an orchestra of sounds for every character, and sometimes when she finished a chapter and looked down, she found Gia already asleep with her thumb in her mouth, and Nico fighting to keep his eyes open just to hear a little more, and she gently freed their hands, tucked the blankets around them, kissed each of their foreheads, and as she stepped out of the room, she realized that for the first time in 12 years, she was not worrying about money, not counting every coin, not calculating which meal she would skip that day, because for the first time she had time to breathe, to live, and to love without having to measure the cost. The relationship between Lily and Dominic began to shift in subtle ways she did not fully notice until the change had already taken root, because each night after the children fell, sound asleep, Dominic made a habit of stopping by their room to check on them, and more often than not, he would find Lily just stepping out with a fairy tale book still in her hands. And at first, they exchanged only a few brief, polite sentences about how the children had been that day, whether Gia had studied well, whether Nico had drawn another picture, the careful questions and answers of two people who did not yet truly know one another, until one night, when Lily could not sleep because the wound in her shoulder ached as the weather shifted, and she stepped out onto the balcony in search of fresh air, where Dominic was already standing, leaning against the railing, and looking out over the glittering sprawl of Manhattan below with a glass of whiskey in his hand. And when he turned toward her, he did not ask why she was there, but quietly poured her a glass of water and pulled out the chair beside him, inviting her to sit. That night, for the first time, they talked about something other than the children or practical matters, and Dominic told her about Elena, about the medical student he had met in a cafe near her university when he was a man in his early 20s, trying to escape the shadow of his family, how Elena knew exactly who he was and what his family did, yet still saw something in him no one else had ever seen, something worth saving, how they loved each other despite everything, married despite the objections of both families, and had 2 wonderful children together. And then cancer arrived like a death sentence, and Dominic stayed by Elena's side every single day of the final 2 years of her life, watching the strongest woman he had ever known slowly fade until she became a shadow of herself, his voice steady as he spoke, yet the pain unmistakable in his steel-gray eyes, a pain that had lived there for 3 years and had never eased. Lily did not know why she opened her heart to him, perhaps because darkness makes it easier to speak truths that cannot survive daylight, perhaps because his grief awakened her own, and she told him about her father, Detective Thomas Chen, the man who had taught her to ride a bicycle in the park on Sunday afternoons, who had read fairy tales to her every night just as she now read to Gia and Nico, who had always believed justice would prevail, no matter how dark the world became, and how she was 16 when the police called, and her world collapsed in an instant, the case never solved, whispers spreading that her father had crossed people he should not have crossed, that his death was no accident. Yet no one dared to speak aloud, and no one dared to investigate further, her mother breaking afterward, and Lily, at 16, forced to become an adult overnight. She also spoke of the dreams she had lost, of the 16-year-old girl who once wanted to be a writer, who filled notebooks with short stories and dreamed of seeing her name in print one day, a dream that died with her father and was buried beneath bills and responsibilities and the daily fight to survive. How she left college after 1 year because she could not afford it, worked every job she could find, from washing dishes to waiting tables to cleaning offices, and how the notebook full of unfinished stories had been thrown away long ago because she no longer had time to dream. Dominic listened without interrupting, his steel-gray eyes resting on her with something like understanding, and when she finished, he said only that they both carried wounds that would never fully heal, but perhaps those wounds were what allowed them to understand each other more deeply than most. And that night, when Lily returned to her room, she realized that for the first time in a very long while, she had spoken of her father without feeling as though the pain was crushing the breath from her lungs. The call from the hospital came on an ordinary morning, while Lily was sitting at the kitchen table watching Gia and Nico argue over who would get the last piece of pancake, and when she saw Mount Sinai Hospital's number light up on her screen, her heart seemed to stop for a beat, because every call from the hospital over the past 2 years had brought bad news, another problem, another bill, another reason to lie awake at night wondering how she would survive. But the voice on the other end did not carry bad news, as the neurologist in charge of Danny's surgery told her that the operation had been successful beyond expectations. The spinal nerves had been freed and reconnected, and although there was still a long road of physical therapy ahead, there was a very high chance that Danny would walk again. Her younger brother, The 19-year-old boy who had been confined to a wheelchair for 2 years after a senseless accident would have the chance to stand on his own legs once more. Lily let the phone slip from her hand onto the table and began to cry. Not the quiet, contained crying she had taught herself for 12 years, so no one would worry about her, but raw, uncontrollable sobs, the crying of someone who had carried too much for too long and was finally allowed to set the weight down, if only for a moment, because she had not cried when she was shot, had not cried through years of debt and desperation, had not cried while watching her mother wither under chemotherapy or while pushing Danny's wheelchair home from the hospital after the accident. But she cried now, crying for hope, crying because for the first time in many years she dared to believe that things could get better, that life was not made only of darkness and pain. Gia and Nico scrambled down from their chairs and ran to her, their small faces tight with worry as they asked all at once whether Lily was all right, whether she was hurt, whether someone had made her sad, and she struggled to say through her sobs that these were happy tears, that it was good news, the best news she had received in a very long time. Dominic appeared in the kitchen doorway, in an elegant gray suit, clearly on his way to a meeting, but he stopped when he took in the scene, and he did not ask what had happened, perhaps already aware through the medical team he had assigned to monitor Lily's family, and simply stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder without saying a word, the touch warm and steady, and Lily realized she was leaning into him without meaning to, as if her body instinctively sought the comfort he was offering. Gia and Nico looked up at their father with lingering concern, and Dominic explained to them in the gentle voice he reserved only for his children that Lily's brother was going to get better and walk again, that it was very good news, and Lily was crying because she was happy, and Gia immediately wrapped her arms around Lily and said she was happy when Lily was happy, while Nico stood beside her and placed his small hand over hers with solemn care, as though performing something sacred. They stood like that for a long while, Lily with tears still streaking her cheeks, the children clinging to her on both sides, and Dominic behind her with his hand still resting on her shoulder, and Lily realized that this was the first time in many years she had not been alone in her weakness, that she had someone to share both sorrow and joy instead of carrying everything by herself. And when she finally stopped crying and looked up at Dominic with swollen red eyes, he simply gave a small nod as if he understood everything she could not put into words, then told Victor over the phone to cancel the morning meeting because something more important had come up, and turned back to ask Lily whether she wanted to go to the hospital to see Danny right away. And she nodded, unable to trust her voice, thinking for the first time that perhaps angels did not always have white wings and halos. Sometimes they wore expensive suits and had steel gray eyes. Mei Chen was allowed to visit her daughter at the penthouse once her health had stabilized after the final rounds of chemotherapy, and Lily stood by the elevator doors waiting for her mother with her heart racing, uncertain what her mother would think upon seeing her daughter living in the luxurious penthouse of a Mafia boss, uncertain how she would react when she learned who was paying for her cancer treatment, and when the elevator doors opened and Mei stepped out with the support of a nurse, Lily had to fight back tears at the sight of her, because her mother was much thinner than the last time Lily had seen her before the diner attack, her hair almost completely gone after chemotherapy, and now covered with a pale blue silk scarf. Yet her eyes were still bright, and the smile she gave her daughter was as warm as it had always been, and Lily hugged her gently, as if afraid she might break, while Mei patted her back as though Lily were still the 16-year-old girl who had once cried in her arms after losing her father. Mei looked around the penthouse with undisguised astonishment. From the soaring ceilings crowned with a crystal chandelier to the glass walls opening onto the full sweep of Manhattan, and she fell silent for a long moment, while Lily could almost see the thousands of questions turning in her mother's mind, the countless worries no mother could avoid when she saw her child living in a world of power and danger. And then Gia and Nico ran out to greet her with the unfiltered enthusiasm of children, Gia proudly announcing that Lily teaches her to read very well, Grandma, while Nico bowed politely and handed Mei a drawing he had made especially as a gift for Lily's mother, and Mei knelt to hug them both with the gentle smile only grandmothers seem to possess, and Lily saw her mother's eyes light up as she watched how the children clung to her, how they spoke Lily's name with open affection. Dominic appeared to greet Mei with flawless courtesy, dipping his head slightly and telling her he was pleased to meet her, that Lily had spoken often of her, that she had an extraordinary daughter, and Lily noticed the way her mother studied Dominic, the eyes of a 56-year-old woman who had endured too much loss, sweeping over him with the quiet, razor-sharp assessment of a mother measuring a man who might shape her daughter's life. And then Mei saw what Lily herself had not yet dared to admit, because when Dominic turned back to ask Lily whether her mother needed to rest, His gaze lingered on Lily for a second longer than necessary, and in that second, there was something softer than social politeness, something that looked like genuine concern, as if he were checking that she was all right before attending to anything else. And May did not miss that moment, and Lily saw her mother's eyebrow lift just slightly. After Dominic excused himself for work, and the children were led away by the housekeeper to give the two women privacy, May took Lily's hand and drew her down onto the sofa by the window, studying her daughter in silence for a long time. And when she finally spoke, her voice was gentle, but carried the weight of a woman who had lost her husband because of men like Dominic Valentino, asking what her daughter was doing here, with these people, and Lily told her everything. About the attack, about saving the children, about Dominic's offer, about the new life she was living. And May listened without interruption, tightening her grip on Lily's hand when she finished, and saying that she had seen the way he looked at her, and more importantly, she had seen the way Lily looked at him. And Lily wanted to deny it, but found no words, because deep down she knew her mother was right even if she was not ready to admit it, and May sighed and told her to be careful, but that she trusted her daughter's judgment, that her father would want her to be happy wherever she found happiness, as long as she remembered that not everything that glitters is gold, and not all darkness is made of monsters. In the nights following her mother's visit, Lily lay awake for hours staring at the ceiling of the luxurious room, locked in a quiet battle with herself, May's words echoing in her mind like an unrelenting bell. I see the way he looks at you, and more importantly, I see the way you look at him. And she could no longer deny it, could no longer pretend that her heart did not beat faster every time Dominic entered a room, could not ignore the way she searched for him in a crowd, or waited for those late-night conversations on the balcony, because she was falling in love with Dominic Valentino, the most powerful mafia boss in Brooklyn, the man whose name was whispered in fear throughout the underworld, and the realization made her feel as though she were betraying her father's memory. Thomas Chen had spent his entire life fighting men like Dominic, had died while investigating the crimes committed by mafia families like the Valentinos, the smuggling and money laundering and violence he believed were rotting Brooklyn from the inside out, and now his daughter was living in the home of that very kind of man, caring for their children, cooking their breakfasts, and worst of all, beginning to feel something for him. And Lily wondered what her father would think if he could see her now, whether he would be disappointed, whether he would feel betrayed, whether he would still be proud of her as Rosa once said he had been. And those questions burrowed into her mind night after night, denying her peace even in sleep. One afternoon, as Lily was walking the children through the park near the penthouse, Victor appeared beside her with the silent step of a wildcat, making her start despite her growing familiarity with the security team, and the 45-year-old man rarely spoke to her beyond brief professional exchanges, so when he asked to speak privately, she knew this was no ordinary conversation. And as he watched Gia and Nico playing on the swings a short distance away, he told her in a low, careful voice that she was changing Dominic. And when Lily did not understand, he explained that in 14 years of working for him, he had never seen his boss smile so often, had never seen him cancel meetings for personal reasons, had never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at her, not even Elena. But Victor did not stop there, because he went on to say that he did not know whether what she was doing with Dominic was good or bad, that he had no authority to judge, but she needed to understand that their world was not kind to soft hearts, that she had seen what happened at the diner, and that it was not a rare incident, but the life Dominic faced every day, and anyone who stood beside him faced it as well, and if she stepped into that world with a tender heart, it would crush her. And Victor made it clear he was not threatening her, but speaking out of respect for what she had done for the children, because he did not want to see her hurt again, this time in a way no doctor could ever heal. Rosa called her later that night from Sal's diner, her voice tight with worry as she said that rumors were spreading all over Brooklyn, that people were talking about the waitress who had saved Valentino's children and was now living in his penthouse, that Lily was playing with fire. And Lily did not know what to say to Rosa, to Victor, or to herself, because in truth she did not know what she was doing either. 1 week after her conversation with Victor, Lily still could not sleep. The warnings from him, from Rosa, from her mother circling endlessly in her mind like relentless waves, and she found herself standing on the balcony at 2 a.m, gazing out over Manhattan glittering below like an endless carpet of diamonds. And she was not surprised to hear footsteps behind her, because sleepless nights had taught her that Dominic too was a man who found no peace in sleep, and this balcony had become an unspoken meeting place for two lonely souls. And he stood beside her without speaking for a long while, simply looking toward the horizon with steel-gray eyes carrying the weight of secrets she did not dare ask about. until he began to speak without turning back, his low voice blending with the night wind, telling her something he had shared with no one but his lawyer, that he was working to transition everything into legitimate business, real estate, restaurants, investments, quietly building a clean empire alongside the underworld one he had inherited, withdrawing day by day from activities he was not proud of, a slow and dangerous process, because in his world retreat was no different from surrender, and enemies would never miss the chance to strike at a sign of weakness. Yet he was doing it anyway, for Gia and Nico, because he did not want his children to grow up in darkness as he had, because he wanted them to have a clean future without having to look over their shoulders with every step. And Lily listened in silence. And when he finished, she asked softly whether it was only for Gia and Nico, and he turned to her, his steel-gray eyes no longer cold but burning with something she was afraid to name. And he answered that no, not only for them. He wanted to be worthy of something better, of someone better. Lily felt her heart pound as she asked in a near whisper what something or someone he meant, and Dominic did not answer with words, instead stepping closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough to see the silver threading his temples, and he lifted his hand to touch her cheek, as though afraid she might vanish if he touched her too firmly. And then he kissed her, gently and slowly, without haste or demand, his lips resting against hers with a tenderness she had never imagined a man like him could possess. A kiss that seemed to last a lifetime, or perhaps only seconds, time losing all meaning, as she stood in the arms of Brooklyn's Mafia boss and realized she did not want to be anywhere else. And when they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers and whispered that he did not deserve her, that his hands were not clean, that he had done things she could never forgive if she knew, that she deserved a better man than him. And Lily understood that this was her last chance to turn back, to retreat before it was too late, to choose the safe path her father might have wanted for her, but she remembered what her mother had said, that her father would want her happy wherever she found happiness, and she remembered the nights of talking with Dominic, the way he loved his children, the man behind the terrifying reputation she had slowly come to know, and she placed her hand over his chest where his heart beat hard beneath the fabric, and told him that she knew who he was, and she also knew who he was trying to become, and that was what she chose to believe in. And the second kiss was no longer gentle, carrying the longing of two people who had been alone for far too long and had finally found each other in the glittering night of Manhattan. The meeting took place in a small cafe 3 blocks from the penthouse, the place Lily stopped every morning to buy herself a latte before waking the children, and she sensed immediately that something was wrong when 2 strangers rose from a corner table and walked toward her with the assured stride of people accustomed to holding power. The woman, a Korean-American in her late 30s with neatly cropped black hair and a severe gray suit, introducing herself as Special Agent Catherine Park, while the rugged man beside her, about 45 years old with a weathered face and razor-sharp eyes, was Special Agent David Morrison, and they invited Lily to sit in voices that were polite, yet left no room for refusal. And when Lily glanced around for Dominic's security detail, Park offered a faint smile and said they had arranged for the meeting to proceed without interruption. They knew everything about her. Park began by calmly reciting details Lily never imagined the FBI would care about regarding an ordinary waitress, that she was the daughter of Detective Thomas Chen, who had died 12 years earlier in a case that was never solved, that she was living with Dominic Valentino, the most powerful mafia boss in Brooklyn, that they knew about the attack at Sal's diner, about how she saved the children, about the relationship forming between her and Dominic that even Lily herself had not yet named, and Morrison slid a thick folder across the table and told her they had been building a case against the Valentino family for 10 years, that they had evidence of crimes ranging from money laundering to smuggling to far worse things, but they needed someone on the inside to finish it, and she was the perfect candidate. Their offer was clear and brutally tempting. If Lily agreed to cooperate and provide information on Dominic's operations, the FBI would erase every remaining debt her family carried, would ensure her mother received the best cancer treatment until she was fully cured, would protect Lily and her family from any retaliation, giving her a new identity, a new life, a chance to start over free from the shadows of the past. And Lily sat in silence as they spoke, her hands clenched around a cup of coffee gone cold, feeling as though she were being torn in half between what they were offering and what her heart was screaming, until Morrison played his final card, invoking her father in a low voice heavy with harsh truth, saying that Thomas Chen had died because of men like Dominic Valentino, that he had spent his life fighting people like this, and asking her what her father would want her to do if he were still alive. The question cut through Lily like a blade, because it was the same one she had asked herself through countless sleepless nights. Yet in that moment, looking into the eyes of the two agents and their compelling proposal, she did not think of her father, but of Dominic, standing on the balcony the night before, with wounded eyes. As he confessed what he was trying to change, she thought of Gia and Nico losing their father if she betrayed him. She thought of the man who had honored his promise to his late wife by caring for her family when she saved his children. And she rose from the table, met Parks and Morrison's gazes without flinching, and said in a steady voice despite her racing heart, that her father had taught her everyone deserved a second chance, even those the world called monsters, and that she would not betray Dominic, not today, not ever, and she turned and walked away before they could say anything more, though she heard Morrison's voice follow her, telling her she knew how to reach them if she changed her mind, and that doors like theirs were never truly closed. Lily returned to the penthouse with heavy steps and a mind spinning like an unrelenting storm, and she found Dominic in his office seated behind the massive oak desk with stacks of files rising around him, and when he looked up at her entering without knocking, his steel-gray eyes immediately knew something was wrong, and Lily did not circle the truth. She told him everything about the meeting with Agents Park and Morrison, about the FBI's offer, about how they knew everything about her and about what was growing between her and him, about how they wanted her to spy on him in exchange for freedom and a new life. And she told him she had refused, that she had said no even when they invoked her father, even when they laid out promises she had dreamed of for 12 long years. And Dominic listened without interrupting, his face unreadable like carved stone, and when she finished, the silence between them was so heavy it seemed to have physical weight. Then Lily said the thing she had been holding back since she stepped out of the cafe, that she had turned down the FBI because she believed in him, because she believed what he had told her on the balcony that night, but that she needed the truth, the whole truth, not selected fragments but everything, because she needed to know what she was protecting. And Dominic stood and walked to the window, turning his back to her for a long moment, as if weighing how much trust he could place in her, and then he began to speak, telling her about the Valentino family, about an empire built 3 generations earlier on blood and violence and deals made in shadow, telling her about his father, assassinated when Dominic was 23, and about how he had been thrown into the role of boss without preparation or choice, given only the command from the family elders that he either take control or watch the entire empire collapse and drag everyone he loved down with it. 14 years, Dominic said in a low voice heavy with time. 14 years he had maintained and expanded the empire he inherited, making decisions he was not proud of, decisions that stole his sleep night after night, decisions he knew he could never erase no matter what he did. And he did not deny what the FBI had in their files, did not try to paint himself as a victim or a hero. He simply told the truth as it was, ugly and guilty and unforgivable by the standards of any court in the world. But he also spoke of Elena, of how she had seen something in him worth saving, of the promise he had sworn at her hospital bed that he would give their children a different future, and of the transformation he had been quietly carrying out for 3 years. He turned back to Lily with eyes that hid nothing now, and told her he would understand if she chose to leave after everything she had heard, that he would not stop her, that he would still ensure her family was cared for because that debt stood apart from everything else. But if she stayed, she needed to know that the road ahead would not be easy, that changing an empire could not happen overnight, that there would be enemies and danger and nights when he would not know whether they would live to see morning. And Lily stepped closer, placed both hands over his chest where his heart beat hard beneath the fabric of his shirt, and told him she was not asking him to become a saint, she was asking him to keep trying to be better. And if he truly wanted to change, he could not do it halfway. He had to choose a different future for Gia and Nico, for himself, for her, for all of them. The bad news arrived on an ordinary morning like so many others. While Lily was preparing breakfast for Gia and Nico with a smile on her face and soft music playing from the kitchen speakers, and Dominic's phone rang with the urgent tone she had learned to recognize after weeks in the penthouse. And the instant she saw his expression change from calm to something frozen and rigid as stone, she knew something terrible had happened. And Dominic moved quickly to her, gripping her shoulders with hands she could feel trembling slightly as he told her, in a voice struggling to stay steady, that her mother had vanished from the hospital. That security footage showed 2 men disguised as medical staff wheeling Mei Chen out of her room at 4 a.m, pushing her through the service exit and loading her into an unmarked black van, and that the night nurse had been knocked unconscious and locked in a supply room, unnoticed until the morning shift began. Lily's world collapsed in that instant, and she heard herself screaming as if from very far away, heard dishes shatter across the kitchen floor, heard Gia and Nico calling her name in panic, yet it all felt distant, as if happening in another world. Because her mother, the woman who had fought cancer for years, who had lost her husband and still raised 2 children, who had only just begun to hope for recovery, was now in the hands of people willing to murder children for revenge. And Lily crumpled to the floor, clutching her head, losing control completely for the first time as she sobbed and screamed that they had taken her mother, repeating it over and over like a broken record that would not stop, while Victor swiftly ushered Gia and Nico out of the kitchen before they could see more, and Dominic dropped to his knees beside her, pulling her into his arms with a force that felt as though he were trying to hold her back from the abyss opening beneath her. Dominic's phone vibrated with a new message, and as he read it, his jaw clenched so hard Lily could hear his teeth grind together. The message from the Castellano family, brief and cruel in the way of men long accustomed to violence, demanding his cooperation in exchange for Chen's safety, insisting that Dominic withdraw completely from Brooklyn, surrender his territory and control, and present himself as a defeated man before the entire underworld, the price they demanded for the life of an innocent woman whose only connection to the war was being the mother of the girl who had dared to stand in their way. And Lily looked up at Dominic with swollen, bloodshot eyes and saw something she had never seen in him before, not the cold fury of a mafia boss, but real fear. Fear for her mother, for everything he could not control. Dominic rose and made 3 calls in rapid succession with the decisiveness of a man who had reached an irreversible choice. The first to his lawyer, the second to Special Agent Catherine Park, whose number Lily had never imagined he possessed, and the third to the most trusted people in his organization. And when he ended the final call and turned back to Lily, his face was transformed, stripped of hesitation and calculation, leaving only the resolve of a man prepared to burn everything down to protect what he loved. And he told her that he was finished playing these games, that he had tried to change slowly to avoid chaos. But Castellano had denied him that chance, that if the FBI wanted cooperation, they would have it on his terms, and he knelt before her, taking her hands and promising in a voice that did not tremble, though Lily could see the storm raging in his eyes, that he would bring her mother back, no matter the cost. The meeting took place in a drab federal conference room washed in cold fluorescent light, its bare, windowless walls stripped of any warmth, and Dominic sat at one end of the long table dressed in a black suit, as if attending a funeral, flanked by 2 elite attorneys whose hourly fees could support a middle-class family for an entire month, while across from them sat Special Agent Catherine Park, with her unreadable expression, and Special Agent David Morrison, with the openly skeptical gaze of a man who had hunted the Valentino family for 10 years and did not believe this Mafia boss truly wanted to change. And Lily sat beside Dominic, her hand clenched tightly around his beneath the table, as though it were the only lifeline keeping her from sinking into despair. The tension in the room so dense it felt almost tangible. Dominic began by sliding a small USB drive across the table toward Park, and saying in a low, steady voice that it contained everything they needed to bring down the Castellano family: warehouse locations, shipping schedules, bank accounts, names and roles of every senior member, and most importantly, proof that they were behind the attack at Sal's diner and the kidnapping of Mei Chen. And he made it clear from the outset that he would not provide information on his own people, that he was not a traitor who sold out those who had stood by him for years. But the Castellanos were not his people. They were enemies who had tried to murder his children, and were now holding the mother of the woman he loved, and he was willing to watch them burn without a shred of regret. Morrison picked up the USB with lingering doubt and asked what Dominic wanted in return. In return, Dominic wanted 3 things, and he listed them with the calm tone of a man reciting an ordinary grocery list. First, that Mei Chen be rescued safely within 24 hours, without negotiation or delay. Second, full immunity from prosecution for himself and his family for all past activities. A clean slate that would allow him to start over without legal shadows following him. And third, complete protection for Lily Chen, her family, and his children against any retaliation that might follow once the information became public. Park and Morrison exchanged a look, and Lily could see them weighing the offer, calculating whether what Dominic was placing on the table justified the cost, and then Park slowly nodded and said they needed time to verify the information and obtain formal approval from their superiors. But she could unofficially commit that if the contents of the USB were real, they had a deal. Dominic was not satisfied and rose from his chair with an icy expression, stating that they did not have time for bureaucracy, that Lily's mother was in the hands of killers, and every passing hour increased the risk to her life. And he demanded an answer now, in that room, warning that if the FBI could not decide, he would handle the Castellanos himself according to the rules of the underworld, and they would lose their chance at everything he was offering. Park studied him in silence, then took out her phone and stepped outside, and the longest 15 minutes of Lily's life passed without a word, the ticking wall clock sounding like a countdown to catastrophe, until Park returned, nodded once to Morrison, and said the two words Lily would remember forever: "They agree." And Dominic squeezed Lily's hand beneath the table as she realized this was the moment everything changed, the moment he formally ended his life as a mafia boss and began an entirely new chapter. The information Dominic provided led to the largest FBI raid Brooklyn had seen in 20 years. And exactly 18 hours after the meeting in the federal conference room, a SWAT team of 50 agents surrounded an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city where the Castellanos were holding Mei Chen, while Lily watched the operation through a live feed at the FBI office with her hands clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms and left red marks, and Dominic stood beside her like a stone statue, his steel-gray eyes never leaving the screen for even a second. And when gunfire erupted through the sound system and agents stormed the building, Lily stopped breathing, praying to whatever force might be listening that her mother was still alive, that they were not too late, that the woman who had given her life would be returned to her. And 12 suffocating minutes passed before the voice of the commanding agent crackled through the radio, saying the hostage is secure. Repeat, the hostage is secure. Lily collapsed into a chair and wept, no longer able to stand, no longer able to do anything but let the tears pour out unchecked. And Dominic dropped to his knees beside her, holding her without a word, and letting her cry into his chest until his expensive shirt was soaked through. And an hour later, Lily was led into a hospital room where Mei lay, thinner and paler than the last time Lily had seen her, but alive, breathing, eyes open and fixed on the doorway waiting for her daughter, and Lily rushed to the bedside and embraced her mother gently, as if afraid she might break, while Mei lifted a trembling hand to stroke her daughter's hair, the way she had when Lily was a child grieving her father, and Danny was wheeled in minutes later, the 19-year-old brother who had made remarkable progress in physical therapy and could now maneuver his wheelchair on his own. And as the three of them held one another, Lily felt that the Chen family was finally reunited after so many years torn apart by illness and poverty and despair. Dominic's information not only saved Mei but brought about the complete collapse of the Castellano family, with 17 senior members arrested in a single night, including Marco Castellano, the boss who had ordered the attack at Sal's diner and the kidnapping of Mei, millions of dollars in assets frozen, dozens of warehouses raided, and a criminal empire that had dominated Brooklyn for 3 decades, reduced to nothing in the span of a week, and the news spread through the underworld like wildfire. Everyone knowing that Dominic Valentino had cooperated with the FBI, that the most powerful boss in Brooklyn had chosen the side of the law over the side of darkness. And some called him a traitor, others a coward, but no one dared say it aloud, because Victor and the security team were still there, and Dominic Valentino, though he had left the underworld, remained a man no one wished to make an enemy of. Dominic formally withdrew from all activities connected to the empire he had inherited, transferring control to those who would decide whether to continue or dismantle it, keeping only the legitimate businesses he had quietly built over the past 3 years, real estate and restaurants and clean investments, sufficient to support his family for generations. And Victor remained at his side, no longer as the right hand of a mafia boss but as head of security for Dominic's lawful corporation, his loyalty unwavering even as the world around them changed completely. And when Lily asked Dominic whether he regretted it, whether he missed his old life, he looked at her with steel-gray eyes now far warmer than they had been the day they met at Sal's diner, and said he regretted only one thing, that he had not done this sooner, before Elena died, before Lily took bullets meant for his children, before her mother was dragged into a war she had never wanted to fight. 6 months after the events that changed all of their lives, Lily stood in the doorway of a newly opened restaurant in the heart of Brooklyn, with a fullness of happiness she had once believed she would never feel, the wooden sign above the entrance carved from solid oak bearing the name Thomas's, chosen in honor of her father, Detective Thomas Chen, the man who taught her that doing the right thing was never easy but always worth it. And inside the restaurant, mounted with quiet reverence on the wall near the register, hung a photograph of her father in his police uniform, his warm smile unchanged by time, and every time Lily looked at it she felt as though he were watching over her, nodding in approval of the path she had chosen, while Rosa stood in the kitchen as head chef, the Puerto Rican woman who had turned down offers from major restaurants to be here, where she could cook with her whole heart and be surrounded by people she loved like family. May sat at a table by the window overlooking the street, her face brighter than it had been in years. After completing her final round of treatment and being declared cancer-free by her doctors, her hair beginning to grow back into a soft black and silver down, her eyes lighting up each time she saw her daughter pass by with a tray or stop to chat with a guest. And Danny sat beside her, not in a wheelchair as he had been 6 months earlier, but in a regular chair, his legs steadily recovering after months of relentless physical therapy, doctors saying that within a year he would likely walk on his own without assistance, and he was sketching in his notebook, a drawing meant as a grand opening gift for his sister, showing the whole family standing in front of the restaurant with radiant smiles. Gia and Nico darted around the dining room like two energetic butterflies, greeting each guest with the politeness Lily had taught them and the natural enthusiasm of children, Gia proudly telling everyone that this was Mommy's restaurant, and every time Lily heard the word, her heart tightened with joy, remembering the night Dominic had formally asked her if the children could call her mother, remembering how he had knelt in front of her holding her hands with steel-gray eyes trembling with emotion, remembering how she had cried and nodded because there were no words for what she felt, while Nico was quieter but always found ways to stay close to Lily, leaving his drawings on her desk like silent offerings. His love unspoken, yet so deep she felt it in every small gesture. Dominic came to stand beside her once the crowd had settled, looking at her with steel-gray eyes now warm as spring sunlight, and on Lily's hand gleamed a simple engagement ring with a small diamond, understated and unshowy, nothing more than a promise of forever between two people who had found each other through storm and fire. And when Dominic asked if she was happy, Lily looked around at the life they had built together, at her mother laughing with Danny, at Gia and Nico arguing over who would carry bread to a table, at Rosa singing a Puerto Rican song in the kitchen, at Victor standing guard by the door with his usual stern expression, barely hiding a smile, and she answered that she was home, words carrying more meaning than any speech ever could. Because after all the years of struggling alone, after all the sleepless nights of fear and despair, she had finally found where she belonged. Outside Thomas's, Brooklyn continued its endless rhythm of hurried lives and quiet stories waiting to be told. But inside this small restaurant, a former waitress once burdened with more than $500,000 in debt, and a former Mafia boss, who had once made the entire borough tremble, sat hand in hand, watching two children and an extended family they had found through unimaginable trials, their story standing as living proof that sometimes the angels we need do not have white wings or halos. They arrive in sneakers and a server's apron, willing to step into gunfire for children who are not their own, that redemption is real, that people can change if they have reason enough, that love can bloom even in the darkest places if we are brave enough to nurture it, and above all that choosing to step forward when everyone else steps back can change not just one life but many, turning tragedy into joy and enemies into family. Dear friends, the story of Lily and Dominic has come to an end, but its lessons will linger far beyond these words, because life sometimes places us in unimaginable situations, forcing us to make split-second decisions that can forever alter our own fate and that of others. Lily chose to act with her heart when reason told her to run, and that courage opened the door to a life she never dared to dream of. Dominic chose to change when the world believed he could not, and that resolve gave his children a clean future. And if this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, like and share this video, so these meaningful messages can continue to spread, so each day we can listen to more stories filled with emotion and inspiration, and tell us how this story made you feel, whether it stirred something in your own life, whether you have ever faced a difficult decision in a single moment. Share with us in the comments below, because we truly want to hear what is in your hearts. And we wish all of you watching this video good health, peace, and joy in your daily lives, and that you may always find your guardian angels along the way, no matter what form they take. Goodbye and see you again in the next video.